Welcome, webinar delegates. My name is Steve Murphy, and I will be your facilitator for this afternoon's webinar. Prior to getting going, I just want to make sure I'm being heard. So if a few of you could just respond in the chat box or the Q&A box that, that I am being heard, that'd be great. Excellent. Thank you very much for responding. The Ontario Public Works Association Right-of-Way Management Committee is pleased to announce that going forward, it will be linking arms with the American Society of Civil Engineers, Utility Engineers, and Survey Institute, known as UESI, their Ontario chapter, to co-host the annual Right-of-Way Management Conference. For those of you who may not be familiar with UESI, we have invited Blaine Hunt to briefly speak on who they are and why they have linked arms to co-host the 2020 Right-of-Way Management webinar series and future conferences. Blaine?
Thank you, Steve. My name is Blaine Hunt. I'm one of the co-chairs for the American Society of Civil Engineers, Utility Engineering and Survey Institute, Ontario chapter. For those that don't know, the UESI is a branch, existing branch of the American Society of Civil Engineers. For us within the industry, UESI is responsible first and foremost for the engineering standard that governs our industry, the ASC 3802. UESI's vision across North America is to really be a worldwide leader in generating products, services, and promoting excellence for utility infrastructure, engineering, and design. The Ontario chapter was founded in December 2018, and UESI Ontario, we're very proud, is the first of the Canadian chapters. We've also been joined with UESI Alberta, BC, that followed recently as well, and the success we've had across Canada. UESI is very proud to be a co-sponsor of the 2020 Right-of-Way Management Committee Conference for this year and beyond. We felt this was a great opportunity for us to join the Right-of-Way Management Committee. We have similar goals and objectives. We believe we can offer this to our members, not only across Ontario and Canada, but also the US as well. And we hope to strengthen an already existing and established conference in the years ahead. So thank you very much for the OPWA and the Right-of-Way Management Committee, and everyone enjoy the webinar today. Thank you.
Thank you, Blaine. The OPWA Right-of-Way Management Committee and UESI Ontario chapter jointly would like to announce that starting in 2020 and going forward, October will be Right-of-Way Management Month. The intent of Right-of-Way Management Month is to promote and to bring greater awareness through education to the many challenging issues associated with the management of the public right-of-way. For October 2020, free educational webinars on right-of-way management and associated topics will be offered every Tuesday and Thursday. If you haven't had a chance to check out all the webinars available, please visit rowmanagement, all one word, .ca. Registration for future webinars is still open. Prior to starting today's webinar, I'd like to go over a couple of housekeeping items. First, all delegates will be muted throughout the webinar to eliminate any background noises that could interrupt our presenter. Secondly, a Q&A will occur at the end of the presentation if time permits. Please use your Q&A tab on your screen to forward any questions for the presenter. The webinar, and thirdly, the webinar is eligible for OSET Continuing Professional Development Program as a partial 1-hour fulfillment of the full day informal course or self-directed study. A proof of registration and a short summary of what you learned need to be submitted to OSET for the webinar to qualify towards your CPD. So let's get started. Today's webinar, it will be working on the right-of-way where pipelines are present. Today's presenter is Gretchen Gordon. Gretchen is the Senior Liaison Public Affairs at TC Energy and is responsible for public awareness, community investment, and community relations within Ontario. The Public Awareness Department supports operations in increasing knowledge for landowners, contractors, and the public with regards to pipelines and pipeline facilities. Gretchen is also an active member of the Ontario Joint Pipeline Group, whose mandate is to decrease unauthorized activities in the right-of-way and provide information on construction across pipeline right-of-ways under the Canadian Energy Regulator damage prevention regulations. Gretchen has worked in the oil and gas industry since 2013 at TC Energy, which was formerly known as TransCanada. Gretchen, the virtual stage is yours.
Great. Okay. Oh, let me fix this a little bit so everybody can see me. How's that? Hoping that looks good and everybody can see my screen now. Thank you, Steve, for that. I had all that written down, so I can skip all of that then. As you can see, as Steve is explaining, I'm also part of the Ontario Joint Pipeline Group, and many of those members are on the line today. So I have some of the contact information on the first screen here. We will provide that to you afterwards as well. And then if anyone has questions for specific companies, we have somebody on the line who should be able to answer any of those questions. So as part of an employee at TC Energy, this is the first time I'm doing a presentation like this, but we are always out there speaking about safety. And this is one of the presentations that we routinely present to public works groups, emergency services, and groups like that. So we are a part of the Joint Pipeline Group, which is transmission pipelines. Just a little background on that. Those are the really large lines that are going through the communities. And then from there, the smaller distribution lines tap off from us. So the transmission lines that are located in Ontario are Enbridge, TC Energy, which used to be called TransCanada. I'm sure you're more familiar with that name. Trans-Northern, Sun Canadian Pipelines, Imperial, and Plains Midstream. And the products that are transmitted in those pipelines are natural gas, oil, and refined petroleum products. Okay, so the quick outline of the presentation that we're going to be talking about today, we'll go over what our public awareness programs provide. Take a look at pipelines and facilities. I have a general map at the end of pipelines in Ontario, but if anyone is ever interested in the mapping and the overviews of where the lines are through your communities, those are available from one of the representatives from the Joint Pipeline Group. Pipeline maintenance programs we'll talk about, and protection systems, and then we'll review the Canadian Energy Regulator requirements. Talk about some ground disturbances and examples of those, and we'll go into crossing documentation and crossing permissions, and end off with safe work practices and review some potential consequences of an incident and what to do in case of an emergency. So the Pipeline Awareness Group are dedicated to working together from different companies to ensure the safety of those living and working near our facilities. Our aim is to educate the public about the importance of calling before you dig or cross, reporting any suspicious activity near our facilities, and how to detect pipeline leaks. And this is an example, this small picture here, hopefully you can see it. This is one of our booths at one of the many trade shows we attend. That's Kathy and I there. We go out and provide messaging to a variety of stakeholders, including homeowners, businesses, excavators and contractors, emergency responders, public officials, public works departments, youth, including schools, and farmers. So we also send out mail outs to anyone living adjacent to or near our pipelines. We attend trade shows, conferences. You'll usually see us at the Right of Way conference with our booth, but today you're seeing us in this format. And we generally try to contact stakeholders before we start any work on our pipelines, before we start any operations and maintenance work or any new developments. We'll be in contact with those groups. So here's a look of an example of the Millcroft Golf Club. That's in Burlington, North Burlington. And that's what a pipeline system could look like through your community. This one is in green space through the golf club, but surrounding communities and subdivisions. So our pipeline diameters range from 8 to 42 inches. In Southern Ontario, there's 1 to 3 pipelines buried within the same right-of-way. You might have that. You might have 3 different companies with multiple products in the lines as well in the same right-of-way. We do not own the land. The pipeline companies do not own the land where the pipeline is located, but we have a legal right-of-way registered on the land. The right-of-way widths vary depending on the number of pipelines within them, and the transmission lines operate at very high pressures. The right-of-way in rural areas can be very wide as 60 meters across, but generally in smaller, in urban areas, it's a smaller size. And here's another example of where a pipeline is located. They're buried underground, and they could be in an area of cleared land referred to as the right-of-way, and they can be hard to see. So they can run through farmers' field, hydro corridors, private property, golf courses, green space, and in some communities, they're directly in backyards. You might be familiar with these markers. You'll see them in the ditches and roadways, and they should be located at all road crossings, railroad crossings, and water course crossings. Some are just warnings and telling you the name of the company that owns and operates that pipeline, the emergency contact information, and what product is in that pipeline. But there's other line markers, such as aerial markers for our helicopters. Something you might come across in your community is cathodic corrosion protection systems. So these are above ground facilities, and they serve as a secondary system to safeguard pipeline integrity against corrosion. And these systems may be located adjacent along the pipeline, and they consist of a rectifier, above ground, and buried power lines. So buried electrical cables could pose an electrocution hazard to workers, something to be aware of. Maintaining pipeline safety is our #1 priority. We are consistently monitored by a 24-hour control center to ensure the safety and integrity of the system. And then in addition to that control center, there's ongoing operations and maintenance activities happening throughout the year for all of the companies. One of those is the first slide I showed you is a picture of an internal inspection tool, pipeline inspection gauge, which we call PIGs. And those go through the lines, looking for any corrosions or dents, cracks, and send us up some information about the line, so that if there is an indication that there's an area we need to look at, we then can go and do an investigative dig and actually excavate the line and take a look and make any repairs if needed. The pipeline cathodic protection is also, as in the previous slide, another pipeline safety system. And we constantly have aerial helicopters monitoring the area. Occasionally we'll have foot patrols going out and taking a look on the right of way, just making sure that nobody's working there without permission. There's There's dumping that happens occasionally on our lines of garbage or construction materials. So we need to know about that kind of thing and have it removed. So you might see our helicopters and our guys in the white trucks out there. We have annual soil cover surveys as well. And then hydrostatic testing. We have some of that going on right now for TC Energy, where a section of our line is, the gas is pulled out and we overpressurize that section with water to see if there is anything that needs to be repaired there, to check for any faults. Our valves are checked by technicians constantly, and then we have a large brushing and right-of-way clearing program as well. There's a need to remove large vegetation on the right-of-way so that the root systems don't come into contact with the line. So before conducting any excavation, either by hand or with machinery, or using mobile equipment outside the traveled roads, the most important thing to remember is to contact Ontario One Call. In Ontario, it's 1-800-400-2255, or you can make a locate request online. The One Call Center will then notify any owners of buried facilities, and that extends out of pipelines. It could be cable companies, etc. So they'll notify anybody who has anything buried there in that area. And representatives will be sent to mark our facilities with flags or paint and help you avoid damaging them. It's a free service and it could prevent accidents and injuries. So by using the One Call system, you can also avoid unnecessary, unauthorized activities that will have to be investigated by the pipeline companies and could lead to investigation by regulators, resulting in administrative penalties. Some examples of ground disturbances are listed there. Any activity really with a disturbance or displacement of soil or ground cover can be a ground disturbance under the CER Act, and if it doesn't fall within the list of exclusions. There's a publication by the CER called the Pipeline Damage Prevention. I have it right here, if you can see it. They can be ordered from the CER, from their publication system, and that lists all the exclusions for ground disturbances and has a lot more information in it for anyone working near or on the right-of-way. Ground disturbance is defined as excavation greater than 0.3 meters with mechanical equipment. Many of our unauthorized activities in municipalities, however, are actually something that I think everyone thinks is very simple. It's the erection of signage. So whether it be a contractor hired by a municipality, a real estate agent, a marketing company that's putting up a sign, roadway signs, when a metal pole is driven several feet into the ground, it could come into contact with a pipeline. So these activities also require a locate. So here's how it works. The process is easy. You need to contact Ontario One Call. Then Ontario One Call will notify anyone who has anything buried in the area. Each underground infrastructure owner is responsible for marking their own lines and then sending back a response to the person who contacted Ontario One Call. And then armed with that information, you can dig safely in the area you marked out, and that's marked out for you. And then further to that, make sure you carefully read and understand and follow the instructions given to you by the underground buried infrastructure owner. Locators right now are taking proper precautions with COVID-19 restrictions, and there's no need for a direct contact when getting a locate. So here's an example of a dig site that has been marked with the paint, and an example of what the primary locate sheet you would be given looks like. You get the paperwork showing where the buried infrastructure is located. And then the next slide is how that area was safely excavated. You can see there's a line right there, which they knew about, and could go around it in a safe fashion. One of the differences when working with transmission pipeline companies is that our regulator is the Canadian Energy Regulator. I'm just going to refer to it as a CER from now on. Pipeline companies are required to report any incidents that happen on our right-of-way, and there's an issues tracking system for violators of those regulations. CER has several publications available, including that pipeline damage prevention booklet I showed you. And then at our booths or anywhere I go to do presentations, I bring along some other information for landowners living and working near pipelines. Is a pamphlet that's available too, has some great information in it. And then the Joint Pipelines objective really is to get that information out to the public and our stakeholders and educate violators to take the necessary steps to avoid incidents in the future and prevent any incidents from happening in the first place. No crossing in the pipeline without written approval from the pipeline company is permitted. If that happens, it is considered an unauthorized activity. And you might remember in the past, if you're used to this terminology, it used to be called the safety zone. Now it's called the prescribed area, and it's 30 meters on both sides of the pipeline from the pipeline center. That's considered the prescribed area. So you may be given permission to work in the prescribed area, but without calling the one call and obtaining permission first, that would be considered an unauthorized activity. There's setbacks for building of permanent or ancillary structures in this area. And after you've called Ontario One Call and it's been identified that your work is within this area, a pipeline representative will arrange to meet you on site. And first they would fill out a 30-meter application to work or a crossing application if you only need to drive over the pipeline to get to another location. And then the locate will happen and the stakeout report will be given to you. Locates are in effect for 30 days. After that time, you'll need to apply to Ontario One Call for a relocate. So sometimes we'll come out and locate an area, but maybe another underground infrastructure company won't come out in time to meet that 30-day cutoff. And so then you would have to ask for a relocate. Pipeline crossings working on the pipeline are within the prescribed area. The difference with working with transmission pipeline companies, and I think this is the major point that gets missed sometimes with working with us, is that unique to the CER regulations, a pipeline representative must be on site for excavation within the right-of-way. So we have to be contacted before digging begins. So once you have that approved crossing or an approved application to work on or within the prescribed area, you must notify the pipeline companies a minimum of 5 days before you actually start the work. It's only 3 days for the federally regulated pipelines, but you won't know which ones are federally regulated or not. So just keep that 5 days in your mind before you actually start the work so that we can make plans to have staff on site and ensure that the pipelines are properly staked. So when working on the right-of-way, you're responsible for knowing where underground facilities are located before you start work. And it's your responsibility to know and verify that the necessary calls have been made to locate the underground facilities. Calling before you cross. This activity also requires a one call. Even if you're not digging, even if you're not excavating, the one call will be able to notify us, and then we can determine if your activity requires a crossing agreement. So crossing the pipeline, that includes doing so with skidders, dozers, any kind of equipment like that. You'll be required to fill out a crossing application if it's determined that you need one, and then the pipeline companies will respond to you within 10 days of receiving this application. And if additional information is requested, then additional time may be required. And this is to make sure that your crossing is carried out safely and to ensure the ongoing integrity of your facilities and make sure that you can get on with the work. Here's a few diagrams here. That's just a picture of a machinery crossing the pipeline. The top right-hand picture is an unauthorized activity that happened on one of our lines where you can see it was wet ground and was dug up with no crossing already predetermined and put down. So it caused a lot of damage there and a lot of rutting. And then the picture on the bottom right is a designated crossing that was put up by the pipeline representatives. It's never too early to know about development. So monitoring land use planning and development is essential due to its impact to pipeline facilities. When we go in and speak with municipalities about new projects that we're implementing, we're hoping to hear about any new projects you're implementing as well. It's important to keep that communication open with us. Early engagement is important because it could be several years for planning and engineering. So early identification enables pipeline companies to clarify expectations of a municipality or developer and possibly influence the integration of facilities into the planning and development. After workshops were held with many organizations, guidance documents were developed into a full-fledged standard regarding development by municipalities by the Canadian Standards Association. Those were published in 2018, and that document is called the CSA Z663, Land Use Planning in the Vicinity of Pipeline Systems, a great reference document available on their website. Pipelines and contractor encroachment. So here is an example of a right-of-way that was cleared by a contractor who wanted to use this, create an access road for heavy equipment. So this is not a typical incident that happens, but it shows you what could happen. They clearly brought very heavy machines on that right-of-way and cleared it without permission. This is this is something that happens more often. An example of an unauthorized activity was that the scope of work for this project changed. So this was actually a utility company who called for a locate, did the right thing, called for a locate, and they were working on their own right of way. Their marks were located for them, the marks were there, the pipeline companies came out, but after the fact, they returned to site and installed a guy wire after all the markings were no longer there. And they thought that they remembered where the locates were marked. And it's very obvious from the picture that they installed the guy wire directly beside a gas pipeline sign. And it came within a few feet of a natural gas pipeline. So if the scope of work changes, please call for a relocate. Safe work practices, as part of a group that may be involved in construction or hiring others to do so. Education for all your contractors you work with and following safe work practices is so important to avoid any incidents. Our Ontario Joint Pipeline maps, which are available to you, show transmission lines. However, there's still many distributor lines, communication lines, hydro, etc. that are not marked. So if you do hit or contact a pipeline, remember to report it immediately, even if it appears to have minor damage, and notify us before it's backfilled to keep from any further damage happening. Besides the Canadian energy regulations, there may also be other regulations that apply. For example, the CER has an understanding with the TSSA, and the TSSA may be called in to investigate any unauthorized activities. Possible signs of a leak, we just wanted to make you aware of. You may be able to smell, for the transmission lines, we don't have that natural odorant added into our lines that you would smell, that rotten egg smell you might be familiar with. That's added in at the distribution center, so that if there's ever a leak in a home, that smell would be present. But the transmission lines don't have that added in yet. So there may be a slight hydrocarbon smell. If there is a leak for oil, you could smell petroleum. You might see dead or dying vegetation on or near the pipeline. There could be water bubbling or blowing into the air, dirt being blown around. But in the case of a natural gas leak, what you more than likely would happen is that you would hear a very loud hissing or roaring sound. So while you're excavating and you think you've struck a pipeline or that a pipeline may be leaking, it's important to follow these steps, whether or not a pipeline appears to be damaged or not. Stop all excavation and construction. Shut off all machinery and move away from the area, upwind if possible, and on foot, and warn anybody else in the area to do the same. Do not attempt to repair the pipe or operate any valves. Call 911 as soon as you're in a safe location. Describe the situation and inform them of what you think is happening. And then, if possible, call our emergency phone number and explain the situation as well. 911 will end up talking to us, but if you can call the pipeline company, that would be helpful. That number is available on all the signage I was speaking about. Do not continue your project until authorized by a pipeline company representative. And we might have to make repairs, so we'll be working with you on that. Natural gas can easily be ignited by motorized equipment. So if you do suspect a hit or damage to a pipeline, immediately shut off all machinery and remove yourself from the area. And don't return to site until you've got the okay from the pipeline company to do so. Who can be affected by an incident? So something happens on our pipeline and it's a large incident. It could affect everyone in the surrounding area, the environment. Emergency responders might have to be called in. Utility customers might suffer from not having any product available to them. It could be very serious. And how can you prevent an incident? Always put safety first, follow safe work procedures, engage in effective communication with your contractors, with your employees, make sure you're in contact with the pipeline companies, watch for any visual clues that indicate you're near an underground facility. Sometimes when we're working out in the field all the time, we start ignoring those signs. They just start becoming something that we're used to, and we don't want that to happen. Damage prevention is everyone's responsibility, so make sure you're keeping aware of those signs and your situation. Most important of all, make sure you call or click before you dig or cross so that we know about any activity happening on the right-of-way and we can come and locate your excavation areas. So this is a map of the pipelines in Southern Ontario. We do have mapping of the pipelines in Eastern Ontario as well. As you can see, hopefully, it's not the clearest picture, but there's a lot going on. We're in a lot of communities, and this is just the transmission lines. Those are available to you if you want copies of that. And I think I can open that up to questions now, if you'd like. Is it Steve?
Yes, thanks, Ken. Very informative. Thank you for that webinar. We do have received a multiple? I know some have been answered, but I'm going to ask them again, and then the person who responded could also say it through the webinar for those who didn't see it in the chat or the Q&A box. So one question in the chat box came in is, how often are foot patrols conducted? And Anne, could you just state your response? Anne Newman? Okay, Anne, you're on mute still. Can't hear.
I might be able to answer the.
Okay.
I know it's different for each pipeline company. So we have a set schedule of different areas, but it would be different for everybody. But we're constantly out there. The technicians are constantly out monitoring the facilities and working on the lines. So it'd be hard to say exactly how often, but it's an ongoing operations and maintenance program for all the pipeline companies.
Okay, now I can read Anne's response. It says, in Toronto area, the right-of-way is patrolled by a vehicle on a daily basis. Foot patrol is done periodically to inspect for changes in the right-of-way, ground cover, and other situations. So that was Anne's response. Okay, over in the Q&A box, one was a general question. Is this presentation available? All presentations in a video and/or in PDF will be made available if we receive permission from the presenters. So, and that will be made available at the end of the month of October at our rowmanagement.ca webpage. So once we know all the permissions, we will upload the presentations to our webpage. Okay, another question we have is, what is the timing for locates? And as a follow-up question is, what happens if locates are taken 2 to 3 weeks? If I can throw that out to the panel.
Hi there, it's Ian Forster with Plains Midstream. For federally regulated.
Sorry, Ian, can you turn your video on so people
absolutely.
see your smiling face?
Hi, everyone. For federally regulated pipelines, we're required to respond to a locate request within 3 business days. Many others are a 5-day waiting period maximum. So if you are you're experiencing a delay in those locates, I would encourage you to get some local contact information so that they can send a technician out and respond in a more timely fashion.
Okay, thank you, Ian. Another one we have here is, can you elaborate on the requirement for crossing permits? If a pipeline crosses a major road, presume you won't need this. However, if a local subdivision road, if it's a local subdivision road, would you still need a permit to have equipment cross?
Ian or Anne would be good for this one.
Yeah, I know Anne put a response, but yeah, but I don't think her mute or audio is working today on this. Yeah, I see she's unmuted, but we can't hear her. Okay, well, would Anne—
Mind repeating that just one more time, please?
Sure, it says, can you elaborate on the requirement for crossing permit? If the pipeline crosses a major road, it's presumed you won't need this. However, if it's a local subdivision road, would you still need a permit to have equipment cross?
And it really does depend on what type of crossing we're looking at. If it's installation of a new facility, even if it's along a permanent road, there may still be a crossing agreement required. But if it's just vehicles traveling on the traveled portion of the roadway, then a crossing agreement is not required.
Okay, great. Thanks, Ian.
Thank you.
Another question, can you discuss the new CER buffering zones?
I think that's in reference to the prescribed area. That the 30-meter prescribed area used to be called the safety zone. It was formerly measured from the edge of a right-of-way, but the recent change was that it's measured from the center of any pipeline, either direction, 30 meters from either side of the center line of any pipeline.
Okay, is your mapping available in GIS format for the local municipalities?
It is. We'd have to work with the municipality separately, and some agreements would need to be signed, but we can get that information to them.
Okay, excellent. Where can you find copies of the maps? That was just, okay, here's another one. How are the distances of 30 meters set as the safe working distance without permission from a pipeline determined? Why not 200 meters or 80 meters? Sounds like an arbitrary number. So how was this distance of 30 meters set?
It was determined by the Canada Energy Regulator that is a reasonable distance on either side of a pipeline to identify and address any risk that might be associated with ground disturbance.
Okay. Just going through to see if I missed any. And okay, I think we did this one. Can you elaborate on the frequency of air and foot patrols? We already talked on that. Okay, since pipelines cross railroads, normal roads, etc., has there ever been a damaged pipeline due to vehicles passing over it?
I wouldn't know the answer to that for all companies, but over the roadway, we're not as concerned with those lines are buried fairly deep. I wouldn't know what the backstory would be for all the pipelines, but when we're talking about crossing with vehicles, we're worried about those heavy vehicles where the pipeline is buried underground.
Okay, I got another one here. A 60-meter easement is quite large. If you are crossing with another utility, would you be required to daylight the whole area with a back truck?
Daylighting the pipelines is required on federally regulated pipelines for any ground disturbance greater than 30 centimeters deep within 5 meters distance of that pipeline. So any ground disturbance within 5 meters of the pipeline would require that pipeline is properly daylighted, preferably with a hydrovac.
Okay, here's another one from the presentation. I understand that there are permits for work and permits for crossing. Is there any instance where you may need both? For example, if you are crossing the pipeline with a utility, would you still need a crossing permit to move equipment over on the ground?
Sorry, Steve, can you read that one again?
Yeah, okay.
A little.
Okay, it says from the presentation, the question is, I understand that there are permits for work and permits for crossing. Is there an instance where you may need both? For example, if you're crossing the pipeline with a utility, would you still need a crossing permit to move equipment over on the ground? So I guess is, do you need both a permit for the work you're doing and another permit for when you're the equipment that's crossing to do that work?
It can all be applied to one agreement, one crossing agreement for installation of whichever buried facility is going to be excavated in or around the pipeline, as well as the equipment, as long as it's predetermined what vehicles are going to be used, what heavy equipment, so that the asset integrity engineers reviewing prior to issuing the agreement can determine whether it's safe to cross with the heavy equipment. So we look at number of axles, weight of equipment, ground pressure per square inch, things like that. It can all be incorporated in one agreement if there's a plan to install a permanent facility and we know ahead of time which equipment's being used. It can be addressed on one agreement, but in some instances there are two separate agreements required.
Great, thank you. Here's a new one. If we have emergency work within the safety zone, how is that handled? Will someone come out ASAP? This would be, for example, a hydro pole hit by a vehicle.
Yes, it's best to call the number that would be on the closest pipeline marker sign, so you're aware of who to contact. There is an emergency number on most pipeline marker signs that will dial into a control center, control room, and from there they could dispatch a pipeline technician as required.
Okay, great. Would it be accurate to say when you see markers along the right-of-way, these are warnings a pipeline is close by and should not be considered the exact location of the center line?
Absolutely, yes. Most of the time, the markers are not located directly above where the pipeline is located, just indicating the general area where the pipeline is.
Okay, great. Okay, over in the chat room, we have, with trenchless technologies being more prevalent, can you discuss the requirements for exposure with especially deep installations? Anne did respond to this. I'll read it out and maybe another panelist might expand more. Anne's response was, road and rail crossings are engineered at the time of construction. Trenchless technologies require minimum of 1 meter separation to ensure clearance of the pipeline. Did that, can anyone expand more on that, or? Oh, she also added, if the trenchless activity is extremely deep, the pipe depth is confirmed, and then the work can proceed knowing the trenchless work is well below the pipe. Okay, thank you, Anne. And here's one. Does a permit or sign off, let me get the wording here. Is it required to, on a permit or sign off, would it be required to install a fence around a house?
Sorry, was the question, is a permit required to install a fence around a house?
No, Does a permit or sign off, is it required to install a fence around a house? I think that's probably the question.
Certainly if it's within that 30-meter prescribed area, because most often those fence posts are going down 4 feet. So in that case, if it's within the 30-meter prescribed area, an agreement would be required.
Would it be accurate to say when you see markers along, oh, we did that one. Sorry about that. Starting to repeat myself. Here's one for discussion, I guess. It seems there are many pipelines regulations set by completely arbitrary methods not related to actual engineering study of forces, etc. Do any of the companies involved ever question these regulations that cause quite onerous permitting and inspection requirements that cost a lot without reducing or increasing safety? I guess a better, maybe reworded is, how active is the pipelines and municipalities in regards to creating these regulations that actually determine like the safety zone and such?
It's a really good question. Certainly, many companies are quite active in reviewing and ensuring that we're all adhering to the best practices and doing the right thing, which is the safest thing. It may seem a little bit cumbersome or arduous to go through the agreement process when it's perhaps, you know, that 30-meter distance away, but erring on the side of safety is the best bet for sure. And we do commit to staying engaged with the regulators as much as is reasonably possible. There are some other standards as well that I don't think we probably have time for today, but more related to CSA standards and class location changes as more development happens around pipelines. So if anybody would like to reach out after the meeting, I'm happy to answer any questions related to the regulations in further detail.
Okay, thank you. I guess we'll do one quick more question, and then we'd like to do a quick poll. And if time permits, we will answer any other questions. The last one is, how long is a crossing permit valid for?
Typically up to 2 years from the start of construction.
Okay, great, thank you. We're gonna just put out a quick poll, a few questions. We'd like to get your feedback before this webinar, and then I will see if we get a couple more questions for our panel. So could you launch the poll? There it is.
Sorry, the first question has the wrong title, but it goes with this presentation.
Oh, yes.
I'm just going to keep the poll open for a few more minutes. We only have, I'm still waiting for about 30 people.
Okay.
Putting you on the spot.
Okay. There it says, I don't see the questions as one of the in the chat line, Lori. As far as I know, it should just appear on your screen. But not, okay. I see some of the, some people, the poll questions that did not appear. We'll have to look into that. Not quite sure why some people can see the polling and others can't.
Okay, we've got 79 out of 84, so I think we'll just close the poll. Oh, 80. Anybody else? Last few seconds. Okay, Steve, you can go on. I'll just close down the poll now.
Great, thank you. And I believe there's one question that we didn't get to. It says, it's almost a follow-up question to a previous one about deep, when the pipeline's deep. It says, I have seen pipelines installed very deep with HDD and others. The requirements to expose the pipeline are very difficult due to depth. Can you clear an area without exposure and knowing the planned depth of the installation in question of other infrastructure above the pipeline?
Certainly worth engaging with the respective pipeline company at the early stages so they can get an engineering assessment done. How deep that pipeline is, where it was installed, what type of pipe casing there might be. The best answer you would get is from the engineers at the respective pipeline company on that.
Okay, great. Anne did also mention, responded, she said, if trenchless activity extremely deep, the pipe depth is confirmed and then the work can proceed knowing the trenchless work is well below the pipelines. If the pipeline is in an area of a fence, then the crossing agreement, okay. So she did respond as well. Okay. Is it allowed for other utilities to install underground within 30 meters of the zone, or will it be in conflict with pipelines? I assume they're talking about being in parallel with them, with your pipeline. I know you can cross over.
Would the installation be within the same right-of-way or within the 30-meter prescribed area?
I'm not sure. Let me go back to that question.
Certainly parallel within the 30-meter prescribed area can be permitted. Within the actual pipeline right-of-way, typically no, due to access concerns and concerns about conflicts with the infrastructure that's already there.
Okay, here's another one. Would the 10-meter buffer as set by the CER be considered an easement requirement?
Sorry, can you please repeat that?
Yeah, it says, is it allowed to, oh, sorry, which one? Would the 10-meter buffer as set by the CER be considered an easement requirement? And what, oh, go ahead, Ian.
Sorry, I'm not quite sure I understand the question.
Yeah.
Forgive me on that. The buffer zone is a 30-meter zone from the center of any existing pipeline.
I think they're talking about setbacks, Ian.
Okay.
I'm not sure exactly, but I was just reading what the question stated as written. So David, if you had a quick, maybe elaborate on the question. We have a few more minutes still. Just while, if nothing else comes in, we will also post all the questions and answers from today's webinar on our website. So it'll also give our panelists maybe a little more time to give more thoughtful responses after maybe a little more understanding of what the question truly is. On that, I don't believe I've received any more, so I'd like to just stop the Q&A now, and thank you all panelists for your answers and participating in that. And let me just go. And at this time, I would just like to thank Gretchen for the presentation and sharing all that very critical information when you have to do work near pipelines. I know I've been involved with some projects where early consultation has created problems and delays, so it's really critical to keep those lines of conversation open with the pipeline companies. I'd like to thank all the delegates, everyone who took an hour plus of their time to come and join this webinar. As I mentioned earlier, a recorded video and/or a PDF of the webinar presentations that we have received permission from will be posted at rowmanagement.ca by the end of October 2020. And I just wanted to point out our next webinar is October 8th, and it's digital twin and GIS, something I don't know much about, so I'm looking very forward to that. And you can see the whole slate of webinars for October. Just go and sign up at rowmanagement.ca. And thank you everyone for your time, and have a great afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
All right, thanks.